All right, everyone, you remember weeks and weeks ago I talked about Justin Trudeau, a reporter. Something had been found in a newspaper from, several decades ago, and apparently a reporter had claimed that Justin Trudeau was touching her inappropriately or something, and he said some off-the-wall shit about, oh, well, if I knew you were a famous national journalist, I wouldn't have acted this way, and it was all very surreal. Now, Trudeau didn't respond to it at the time. Partially because literally it was like third-page news on a few minor journalistic sites, and then it was on Twitter a little bit. But for the most part, nobody in the lamestream was talking about it. Now apparently it went mainstream. Weeks after I talked about it because I fucking saw it on Twitter and 4chan, and now all of a sudden Trudeau's facing actually some pressure to resign or whatever, and he's like, well. His response, officially, once the lamestream media pressured him on it. He didn't respond when it was like the underground media because, unfortunately, the lamestream still controls Normie Canada. He comes out and he says, well, I don't recall it that way, and I am apologetic, regardless, but, I guess they're remembering it differently than I did. So basically like a cop-out. So it's basically, hey, I interacted with this person. He's admitting that. I guess they took it as being inappropriate. I don't remember it that way, but I'm sorry anyway, don't worry. Now, is the Me Too crowd going to call for his resignation? Because they've literally called for people to be curb-stomped and deplatformed and everything else based on no evidence at all, but just a claim many, many times. I would think it would be all that much more substantial if it was a person in a significant public capacity like Justin Trudeau. He's the head of state of Canada. Okay, maybe not the most important job in the world, but it's up there somewhere. Not a nuclear state, not a major military power, but yeah, a first world nation with a good economy. Okay, he's got enough diplomatic leverage so that his opinions actually fucking matter on the world stage. Last I checked, he was falling desperately out of favor, though, with the Canadian people, so his hobbit face cute boy routine no longer works. This is certainly going to harm him to some degree, because now there's the lingering question over whether the Prime Minister or President or whatever you have up there in Tim Horton land of Canada is actually like a sexual assaulter, like a pervert or something. I'm just going to call him a rapist. Because basically that's the Me Too thing. Now, I'm weighing in here on the side issue of the Me Too sex assault thing. It's really good, generally speaking, to see people who have they've been perverts for 30 years, like a Weinstein or something, or a Clinton, to tell the truth. It's good to see them held accountable. The problem is, on the legal side, and even on the deplatforming or civil side, if it's just allegation without any actual further evidence, it makes me slightly uncomfortable. It's like, if you get 80 people like Bill Cosby, it's sort of cut and dry what fucking happened. It's like if you've got dozens and dozens of females you've associated with directly, in physical proximity, who are saying that you're a dirtbag, basically, you're probably a dirtbag. Because it would be difficult to envision a scenario in which that many people you had interacted with in an interpersonal way really just fucking hate you and decided to stab you in the back uncoordinated. It wouldn't make a lot of sense. You've got to be some sort of dirtbag to piss that many people off over, several decades of time, I would think. And you've got dozens of people, a Weinstein, I think, what was it, half a dozen people with Kevin Spacey and stuff like that. When it's one person, the only tragic irony here is that if Justin Trudeau were a conservative leader of Canada, he probably already would have resigned. It would have been front page news the second that the old piece had been dug up. In fact, he never would have won in the first place because it would have been dug up years ago. He never would have been capable of taking office. He would have been completely destroyed. Even his own party would have voted him out in disgrace. But because he's young and hip, kind of, generally speaking, hobbit-faced, and he's a liberal, he's probably going to get away with it, and he'll just brush it aside. That's essentially what it's about. The Canadian media won't talk about it as much, because they like him. He's a media darling. He's like Obama's friend. It's like if it had happened to Obama, he probably would have brushed it aside too, but if it were to happen to Trump tomorrow, he'd be impeached tomorrow. Let there be no mistake, he absolutely would get forced out of office. There's a double standard. There is a double standard within politics. I'm going to tell you, I think it has almost more to do with a person's youth and charisma. Justin Trudeau's well-spoken. He's not the greatest, but he's coherent. He's not George W. And he's on the younger side. So he looks good for the cameras. It's a protective sort of thing for him. Whereas if he was fat and 70 and like bloated and wearing suspenders, probably it wouldn't work for him now, would it? I think like Rob Ford is the only exception up there. Like he smokes crack, binge drinking, using racial slurs, swearing at everyone, literally charging across the room after them, and he never got removed because at least he did a good job on policy. That might be the one thing that sinks Trudeau is literally his policies suck, and the Canadian economy is not doing as well. Canadian diplomacy is like in shambles, like can't step toe to toe with Trump. What you need is a stronger leader for Canada. You need someone that's, looking forward into the future rather than back at, 1800s era socialism. That's really what Canada needs, I'd say. But the thing that gets me is really the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is that 1 million people would be protesting outside his log cabin right now, waving "Don't touch my beaver" flags if he were not a liberal. That's ultimately the double standard. Or I should say, if he weren't an establishmentarian, there are people that are neocons who'd get away with it. Trust me. If he were a political outsider, a maverick, if he had new ideas, he'd be having people throwing their pink panties at him. Oh, shame, shame. He'd basically going around dinging the bell and shit. That's what would be happening. So yeah, he needs to drink another Tim Hortons and eat a pile of pancakes, and then he needs to resign, or at least he needs to further address the issue. Because even the way he addresses it is a little bit odd. He's like, well, that's not the way I remember it. I'm not saying it, no, I'm not saying I didn't touch her, scratch her shoulders, maybe put my hand up her skirt or something. I'm not saying that this stuff didn't happen, it's just I don't remember it as being assault, per se. Well, I thought the line was, believe her if she says it. Well, then I'm just going to believe this reporter who's making this allegation years ago and say, hey, you sexually assaulted a reporter. Wasn't it on the campaign bus or for his daddy or something at the time? And he was like, wouldn't he be 30 at the time or something? He would have been really young. This was, some time ago. But it's like, the first Cosby accuser was talking about the 90s, I think. Or the early 2000s, it's a little bit a different game. It can't lead to a criminal proceeding if it's that old. It's just not going to happen. That's about all. Peace out.